Hi there! Thanks for joining me today as we explore the many transformations that have taken place to restore and preserve the history of the Douglas Mansion into the home of the History Center. Let's take a look. George and Irene Douglas built this home in 1898. The splendid new house was occupied by the new parents, baby Margaret, and several servants. The birth of Ellen Douglas in October 1905 prompted the family to consider moving to a larger home. The Sinclair family, led by widow and matriarch Caroline, was looking to move out of her large estate, which would later be known as Brucemore, on the First Avenue Boulevard near 20th Street East. The families worked to complete the most memorable real estate swap in Cedar Rapids history. After the death of Caroline Sinclair in 1923, the family sold the home to mortician John B. Turner. The Turner Mortuary was a successful and growing business in Cedar Rapids, and in 1923, the business needed a new and larger location. The Turners hired artist Grant Wood and architect Bruce McKay to oversee the conversion of the home into a mortuary. Changes to the mansion were extensive. The former dining room on the first floor was expanded to create a large funeral chapel for services. The expanded second floor included an embalming laboratory and a retail showroom for funerary products. The signature round room became an office for David Turner, son of the owner. In 1978, the Turners sold their mortuary business to the Lingy family, operators of Cedar Memorial Cemetery, funeral, and cremation services. The Lingys invested in a detailed renovation of this property in 1982. An effort was made to recreate the interior look of the mansion from its early days as a home for the Douglas and Sinclair families. Funeral services here ceased in 2004. The History Center took ownership of this property in late 2014 and moved into the refurbished home in the fall of 2018. This is how the building, now fondly referred to as the Douglas Mansion, appeared in the spring of 2018, right before the History Center began external rehabilitations. Note that there is no railing above the porch, the dormers are in disrepair, and the Widow's Walk had to be removed to repair the roof. This is how the History Center found the railings. Workers are shown here installing railings that were recreated. The facade is shown right before rehabilitation and after. This is how the facility looks today, gleaming as it did over 120 years ago. Concrete wraps around the front porch columns were installed at some time to help preserve the columns. Unfortunately, they trapped water and the columns disintegrated. Later, these columns were completely rebuilt. Paint 3/4 of an inch thick covered the caps of the columns. The caps underwent extensive paint removal, and beautiful detail that was lost for decades under the old paint was found again. The front stairs were treacherous and crumbling. They were removed and replaced. This is the east wall of the building just before rehabilitation. Noted are several changes, including a large protective structure, which was erected over the Grantwood window, the embalming room window, which was covered in wood, the hearse entrance, where hearses entered and left the building, and shutters on the second floor windows. These were plastic, non-functioning, and completely out of proportion to the size of the windows. The original home did not have shutters, but they were added by the Sinclair family and later removed by the Turners when the building became a mortuary. As you can see, the shutters are now gone and the embalming window is restored. The History Center now uses the old hearse entrance as its main entrance, having installed period-correct doors. The hearse drive was in terrible condition when the History Center took over. Not only was the asphalt heaving, buckling, and sagging, drainage was a significant problem. The drive is now graded properly, and the concrete should last for a very long time. This wing of the building was added sometime in the 1930s. The original purpose was to house the hearse and ambulances for the funeral home. Later, the space was used for flower storage. When cremation became more popular in the 1950s, a cremation oven was installed. This space continued to be used as a crematory until funeral operations ceased in the 2000s. The History Center's goal was to bring the appearance of the wing back to the way it was when it was first erected. No photos exist, so the History Center used the adjacent Grant Wood Studios doors as a model. It was found that the roof of this structure was being held up by, well, practically nothing. The construction crew quickly replaced the footings at the front of the structure and then installed the brick columns you see here. Now the structure looks as it most likely did in the 1930s. The perimeter wall adjacent to 8th Street Southeast was crumbling. At one point, someone had run into it with a vehicle. The vintage bricks had to be hand removed. The old mortar was scraped by hand as well. New footings that would drain properly were installed, and the wall is now ready to withstand another few centuries of time. This vintage photo from the early 1900s shows the rear of the building facing 2nd Avenue. Unfortunately, we've been unable to identify the woman pictured in the background. If you look on the ground to the lower left on this photo, you'll see a square object with a round center. This was the access to the old cistern. The History Center unearthed this cistern and found it to be a remarkable bit of masonry work. The 1 foot of water at the bottom was crystal clear. The History Center decided to reseal the cistern to perhaps use it purposefully sometime in the future. The porte cochere was added by the Turners sometime in the 1930s. The purpose of this space was to allow for a covered and protected area for hearses to facilitate the transport of bodies. The History Center programmed this space to become both the main entrance and a classroom. This allows for handicap accessibility. Folding doors from an upstairs room were repurposed to separate the two spaces when necessary. Here's a look at the completed main entrance to the facility. While the facility operated as a mortuary, this room was used by pastors as they waited for services to start. The room was transformed into a handicap-accessible restroom. This room, which is adjacent to the large program room on the first floor where funerals were held, was used for choirs during funeral services. The area is now used for programs and to display exhibits. Very few vintage interior photos of the Douglas Mansion exist. However, this one photo, circa 1930, is of the funeral chapel, which the History Center has repurposed into the Pilcher Program Room. Here are before and after shots of the Pilcher Program Room. What a transformation! The paint colors were determined by a forensic study of the walls, and what you see here, and almost throughout the entire building, is what you would have seen in 1898. This room was originally the kitchen for the families who lived in the mansion. When the Turners transformed the home into a mortuary, they added an organ in this room. It was also used for overflow seating during funerals. The elevator opens into this space, so it needed to remain fairly clear for people visiting the History Center. The History Center decided to turn it into the Voss and Kemper gift shop. The History Center had multiple layers of paint removed from these massive pocket doors, which are located between the Pilcher Program Room and the foyer. The intent was to find the original stained wood. It was determined that these doors were never stained, and so the doors were simply painted. Today, these doors remain open for easy access. This vintage photo of the foyer is circa 1900. Note the stylish leopard rug. In the upper right-hand corner of this photo, you can also see the harp in the music room. This photo, circa 1940, shows the Turners' decoration of the foyer for their mortuary. The Lingeys ornately decorated the foyer for their use of the facility. And here's a look at the foyer today. This photo, circa 1900, shows the room adjacent to the foyer. It was used as a parlor or sitting room for the Douglas and Sinclair families when they lived in the home. The Turners and Lingeys used the room as a library and a place to gather family members when the facility was a mortuary. This view of the library shows how the History Center found it. Note the tall box in the corner with the word head at the top. This was a box used for shipping human bodies, left behind by the Lingeys. The room is now a library again. The History Center's library draws researchers from all over the country who dive deep into a very robust archive of material. This is a view from the landing on the grand staircase, looking up towards what has become the Lingey Round Room. This room was originally called the music room when it was a home. The room held both a harp and a baby grand piano. The floor tiles seen in this photo look suspiciously like the kind made of asbestos when the carpet was removed. Upon professional inspection, these had no asbestos, and incidentally, there were very little asbestos material found anywhere in the building. This music room originally had two very tall windows that looked over the backyard of the estate. The Sinclair family removed one of these windows and blocked it to create a large dumbwaiter on the exterior of the building that was used to haul steamer trunks to the second floor. Here's a look at the music room today. In the 1940s, the Turners needed more space for their administrative offices. They built an addition over the porte-cochere that used the two windows of the music room. This space was originally a meeting room, but eventually it was divided into 3 offices. One of these offices held a refrigerator-sized safe that filled what was the original 7-foot window in the music room. The History Center has since transformed this space into the Severa Boardroom. In this photo from the 1900s, you'll see the view of the music room from the second floor landing. Notice that there is no ornamentation in the arches. Grant Wood, who was hired to serve as the Turner family's interior decorator, designed the sunburst and French windows that now decorate these arches. During the rehabilitation undertaken by the History Center, the template that Mr. Wood created to match the curve of the fireplace ornamentation to that of the base of the sunburst was found tucked behind a wall. In its original configuration, this area was most likely a bedroom to the left and a bathroom to the right with a wall dividing it. When it became a funeral home in 1924, an addition was added to the east, which included a second-floor large room to display caskets and other funereal wares. The bathroom on the right was used for preparing bodies for viewing. Hair was styled and makeup was applied in this room. In order to allow for a larger exhibition gallery, the History Center chose to remove the wall that was added sometime after the 1924 addition. This photo shows the space right after the wall was removed. In the late 1930s or early 1940s, the Turners added a second-floor embalming room to their facility. This was a large L-shaped room. The Lingeys, at least a decade after they took over the facility in 1982, decided that the space would be better as a catering kitchen. This is how the History Center found one corner of the room, and now it's used as a break room for the History Center's volunteers and staff. This is another section of the Lingeys' catering kitchen, including the scrub sink. The History Center converted this into a women's restroom. Where this toilet sits used to be an embalming table. The Lingeys chose to turn this space into a restroom. The History Center decided to make this a restroom as well. You can see that the toilet had to be moved slightly to the north to make the best use of space, and the new floor tile, although the right size, is slightly lighter in color than the original embalming tile. This is the round room, originally a sitting room for the husband and wife of the house when it was a private home. It became David Turner's office, a place where families would sign the contracts for a loved one's funeral. The Douglas Mansion's roof leaked due to a badly engineered repair of the Widow's Walk balustrades. Holes were accidentally drilled into the sheet metal roof, and water flowed through like a sieve. The water ran along a rafter and dripped into the round room. In this photo, you can clearly see the water damage done to the ceiling. The floor was tremendously warped, and the window frames were also severely damaged. This is the only room from the original house that was not brought back to the 1898 wall colors. When the forensic study of this room was done, it was determined that it had always been wallpapered. However, the original 1898 wallpaper was a very dark green with little pattern. The History Center decided to choose wallpaper that was more in keeping with the 1920s style, which is what you see here. Using standards exceeding federal regulations, the History Center was able to bring back the regal feeling of this room. This was originally a bedroom with a sitting area used by the families that occupied the home. Bodies were viewed in this room when it was a mortuary. When the History Center removed the carpet, thin sheet flooring was covering the original floor. The folding doors you see here were moved to the first floor entrance and repurposed to separate the entrance from the Transamerica classroom. The area is now the West Gallery, an exhibition room dedicated to telling the entrepreneurial stories of Lynn County. This is the opposite angle of the same room. Note that the thin flooring was removed and the original flooring was below. There are many nails in this floor. This was done by the mortuary to dampen the squeaks caused by footsteps that may disturb guests at a visitation. Also interesting is that the floors in the Douglas Mansion were never finished or stained. Once the decades of dirt and wax were removed, glorious light-colored floors were found. Only a light floor sealer was applied by the History Center to finish the floors. The myriad nails were left to tell the story. This is the interior of the room that was the original second-floor bathroom for the families. As mentioned, it was then used by the funeral staff to dress, apply makeup, and do the hair of the deceased. Once the wall was removed, it opened the Esther and Myron Wilson Gallery space that is very suitable to telling Lynn County stories. This is the other side of the wall of the bathroom-turned-body dressing area. Note that the door to the casket display room is normal-sized, and it was actually a pocket door. The History Center chose to open up this doorway to make a more welcoming entrance to the Diane and John Smith Gallery, also known as the Permanent Gallery. This is the Smith Gallery looking southwest. The lighter colored board on the far wall is where funeral wreaths and other items for purchase were displayed. The window at the end was originally on the first floor of the building when it was a private home. The window was then moved here during the 1924 renovation. This area also saw severe water damage from a different roof leak than what affected the round room. In this photo, the ceiling had just been removed and the light fixtures dangle, waiting to be removed. Here we see the same vantage point today. Again, we see the same room looking northeast. Note that only 2 windows are visible. The original embalming room window was completely covered in drywall by the Lingies when they stopped using this space as an embalming room. This window has been restored to its original condition. This is another view of the permanent gallery. The ceiling is in place and the floor has been stripped. The third floor of the Douglas Mansion was originally the servants' quarters. When the facility became a mortuary, the rooms were rented to the mortuary staff, so someone would always be around to accept the delivery of bodies. This is the landing area. This is now a small administrative waiting area. The furniture is courtesy of Shuttleworth and Ingersoll, a revered Cedar Rapids legal firm. The space shown here was originally a bedroom for the servants and then an apartment for mortuary staff. At some point, it was converted into a full kitchen for the mortuary staff. Today, it is the museum director's office. This area was also a bedroom apartment, which now serves as the office for the curator and collections manager. Here is another bedroom, which became a dinette when the Turners took over the building. One of the closets was turned into a tiny kitchen, complete with a small gas stove and range. It was said that the Turners thought it important that the staff ate together. The room now is the program manager's office. The final bedroom on the third floor is now the administrative coordinator's office and a workroom for staff. This small bathroom once held a clawfoot bathtub. Today, it serves as a kitchenette for the History Center staff. Wow, what a transformation we've made from the original Douglas family home to the current home of the History Center. I hope you'll join us in person to see the transformation and beauty of the historic Douglas Mansion. For more information, including museum hours, please visit us online at historycenter.org.